Hello, this is Brian Lindholm from Fed Savvy Strategies. I'm really excited to bring back to you a series that we paused for some time, but brought back to life through a lot of interest, called the Deadly Sin series. The whole point of this series is to use publicly available information from the ever popular and wonderful and sometimes entertaining GAO protest docket, in which the General Accountability Office will sometimes publish decisions that they weigh in on when companies and bidders protest contract awards. This is a fantastic resource for competitive intelligence, not just to understand what different businesses do and how they tend to practice their business, but also to learn a lot about the agencies themselves and their decision-making process. You can actually learn quite a lot from it. And this is a really interesting protest we're going to talk about today that's related to the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, CJIS, and a biometric services program specific to using software development and safe, agile methodologies to do rapid iteration of software development. So that's the very brief primer of what this involves. In the end, after a series of protests, not one, not two, but several, it came down to ManTech, the protester, versus Leidos, the nominal winner of this contract and winner of it several times. It went through several iterations of protests. So here we go. Well, let's go ahead and kind of break down what happened here. So ManTech in the last protest, and we're not going to get into the older protests. That would be a lengthy level George R. Martin and his expansive series of things like the Song of Fire and Ice and other books he's written that are really, really long. Good, but really long. We're not going to make that quite so lengthy. Keep it a little bit more of a Cliff Notes version. So we'll just focus on the last protest, which in itself has a lot of things we can learn from it. And that's always the point of these things, is what can we learn from these protests about solution development, capture, persuasive writing, and sometimes even some basis of protests that are questionable on a good day. So in this particular one, ManTech is challenging the FBI and their assessment of their proposal, of some of the ratings that they got in their evaluation. Compared to Leidos, they did not score terribly well. And also there's another part of the protest that is, at least from what I've experienced, a little bizarre, but that's something we'll cover here in just a bit. Let's first get into the more, I'd say, routine part. It's very common in a protest to challenge your evaluation. What you're trying to do, of course, is unravel the evaluation itself, of which you did not get a favorable rating on that led to your loss. So ManTech is going after that. And what's interesting about this is also we have to understand the nature of how the FBI ran this. They did not one, not two, but three phases, a three-phase advisory structure to, and this is not unusual, of course. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen this. Some of you may not have seen this, where the agency will say, yeah, I don't think you're ready to ride this ride, so you probably should go home and grow a few more inches, or you just get better prepared and try it again. Nice try, but you're not the right guy for us. Sort of it's it's me, but it's you. It's definitely you, and that's what happened here. So in the first phase, what the FBI is going to do is go through and do a pass-fail on your facility security clearance, pass-fail on that. Take a look at your corporate experience. Take a look at your staffing approach, both being very relevant here. And they were going to use confidence ratings, high, some, or low, to reflect what their assessment of your first phase submission was. Then in phase two, they get a little bit more in the weeds with a safe, agile methodology demonstration. So you can really show them, because the core of this is using safe, agile methodology to do software development. Again, high, some, or low confidence rating. then at the end, once you've gotten all the way to the end, and in theory they've weeded out those who are just not tall enough to ride this ride, to look at the price and then make a final determination. So in this, phase one, bidders go in there. Some got voted off the island, or at least were encouraged to leave the island because they just weren't ready for it. So ManTech didn't do great in this part. They got the pass-fail part, no problem. It's not unexpected at all. I can't fathom how ManTech wouldn't pass that, for goodness sake. But then in the corporate experience and staffing approach, they only got a some confidence. So the FBI said, yeah, you're not really among the higher rated bidders here, so we're going to suggest you take a knee and just sit this one out. ManTech said, no thanks, I'm pressing on. Okay. Generally, when the government says you're not ready to ride that ride, that's a not so subtle way of saying you're not in the hunt. Go away. But ManTech press on. So phase two happens, the safe, agile demonstration. ManTech managed to get a low confidence rating. Not a some, not a high, but a low. Not very flattering at all. The FBI said, yet again, you're not among the highly rated bidders here. You're really not likely to get an award. We're going to suggest you take a knee and step out. ManTech said, nope, we're going to press on. Probably a couple of not so subtle signals that ManTech was not in the hunt. So in the end, got down to price, and then Leidos unsurprisingly won. And it's worth noting that in the scores, Leidos got high confidence in everything. Corporate experience, staffing approach, demonstration that killed it. And their price was a little higher than ManTech's. But when you think about the fact of how highly rated they were, this being a best value trade-off, not surprising that they won. So ManTech challenged, hey man, I'm pretty sure that our ratings, and after they revised their protests, they originally did challenge everything, but they actually backed off on the low confidence rating on their demonstration, which is a little peculiar, but it's all right. They challenged the semi-confident in their corporate experience and staffing approach. So let's dig into that. So how did they manage to get a some confidence? So it's not abysmal, but it's not great. So they had corporate experience, and some of the examples they provided. The FBI saw them as really more operations and maintenance tasks versus full-scale development, which is the point of this. This is not keep the lights on, keep the train running on time. This is really about, hey guys, can you do no-kidding development? Can you really do this kind of work? Do you have experience doing this work at the scale and the environment we're working in? So they kicked those back to ManTech, and ManTech had the chance to revise them. And they revised them with what the GAO commented on was really essentially a couple of copy-paste changes. Nothing really substantially different between the first submittal and the FBI given a chance to revise it, and not much revision came through. So I think that didn't exactly help their case. And frankly, that really went back to the principle here that first impressions matter. Once the genie's out of the bottle, to go back through and rewrite history is really not likely to happen. So you got to make sure you stick the landing on the first go-around. Otherwise, his evaluator is going to be instructed, hey, listen, look at the revised content. But in reality, they're humans, and they can't unsee what they've already seen. So you're already in trouble as it is. And the staffing approach for a really no-kidding development contract, ManTech managed to get upwards of 6 weaknesses there. And really, one of the parts that kind of sunk them here was they relied very, very heavily on incumbent capture, with a very slow hiring of replacement personnel over time, and not really, I guess, a particularly convincing strategy of how to reload the team, as well, natural attrition is going to happen. You're going to lose people. You're not going to keep them for an entire 5 years. It's not even realistic to expect that. But I guess in this case, the FBI was not enamored with, we're just going to do incumbent capture and then come in there and call it a day with some, maybe this is my read into it, a casual reload of people as you go. So that didn't help their case at all. If you get 1 or 2 weaknesses, you might be able to muddle through them. But 6, that's not great. So as we press on here, I mean, they're already in a bit of a pickle, frankly, as they go through this. But really at the core of this is using safe, agile methodologies. The FBI was all over that. That's the core, what they wanted to do, how to develop everything. And this is something where as you back into the corporate experience, the staffing approach, all of it, and the FBI's assessment that ManTech just didn't understand what the hell Safe Agile was. That it was a lack of understanding of the Safe Agile framework, lacking details of how it works, and it seemed very buzzwordy to them. This is something that, by the way, I see very, very often in losing bids, where it's someone doing jargon and they're going to write things that are nonsensical, like going to optimize synergy for better shareholder value for cross-platform holistic integration, or other things where it's like a word salad of stuff that doesn't demonstrate that you get it, that you're just going to use terms to try to fake it till you make it. Not accusing ManTech of anything, just so we're completely clear, but these things happen even with the best out there, and I think that we all need to take a company like ManTech very seriously. And then I think the nail in the coffin was there was not really any examples of them actually using Safe Agile, which, if you think about this, folds back into the nature of ManTech's original experience as we understand from the protests, that it was largely O&M centric, which would not be using Safe Agile processes. So the story was already built on quicksand to start, and it just got worse as they went. So not a good thing. And if you look at the ManTech price, I mean, I suppose if there was some dramatic difference in their price versus, let's say in this case, Leidos, who did win, that even with the lower ratings, ManTech could have won, but they were only 6.7% lower. You're not winning with that. Now, granted, we need to look through the RFP to look at it more, but what this was looking at was a balance of both price realism, measure risk really, and price reasonableness, looking to ensure you're not going to pay too much. And in this case, they weren't offering some extraordinary discount to tempt them being the FBI, but they weren't pricing it so stupidly low that it would in itself create a sense of risk. So yeah, even if honestly this is just Brian Lindholm's opinion for what it's worth, I'm not returning for the record, just sort of in this case, observing what I see here, even if they would have gotten their scores up, the other parts in terms of staffing and experience, they weren't winning this one. That was simply not going to happen. Leidos' scores were simply too high across the board, and with a nominally slightly higher price, 6.7% difference, probably not going to win. So that was a non-starter. So, but they tried. But this, I think, some of the big takeaways though, is that the first impressions matter. Yeah, you can revise things in your proposal. That's, of course, you can do that. But that first impression is not going to go away. So you made your shot. You shot your shot and you missed. So not a whole lot, unless they really wanted you in the first place. Then they might be willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. But there was kind of a vibe throughout this that they just weren't that into you, ManTech. And that was not going to be a win. All right, so beyond that, then the staffing approach being at a high level, a little bit of a basic one, just going to focus on incumbent capture and then call it a day with maybe a more passive approach to reloading the workforce as time goes on, was just not going to work. And they really were going to be taking away Leidos personnel. Certainly we've observed when Leidos loses something and they really like the people they have, they are probably going to be inclined to take their toys and go home. So that could have been something that the FBI was factoring in, they knowing that Leidos is going to leave. They might just keep their people, and then the transition approach, the staffing approach for ManTech was going to fall apart immediately. So that could have been a factor, but that is purely a hypothetical. So last thing here, and this is a little unusual, if I'm honest about it. ManTech challenged the validity of the RFP at its core. Okay, so they were citing presidential guidance. It's actually linked on our blog there if you want to read it yourself, that tells executive branch employees better get back to in-person work. Right, so the era of Zoom and team meetings because you're all sitting at your home in your pajamas doing your work, those days are over. Well, ManTech challenged that the RFP did not account for that. And they were concerned about more in-person work, which would have really changed the requirements, and the FBI did not reflect that in the RFP. Well, the protest, look at the digest, it actually says, well, this applies to federal employees, and the FBI had accounted for a contract workforce that may or may not be co-located. They made that call. It's up to the agency themselves to implement this guidance, not for the contractor with the not so subtle jab back at ManTech. It's not your role to tell us how we implement this. I can understand from ManTech's perspective, this is again an assumption, that they might be concerned about the requirements changing post-award, that they suddenly have to completely change their staffing strategy in terms of on-site work. And I get that. That's something I would be thinking about myself if I were them. Is something going to move in a significant way that completely unravels my whole staffing strategy? I get it. That makes sense. But in the end, it's not your role, not your place, and either you bid it as is, or you take exceptions and see if the government accepts those exceptions, or you just don't bother and walk away. So it was a very peculiar, in some ways, protest that this dragged on for quite some time as ManTech kept on trying to secure victory. But again, takeaways here, really, I mean, starting with the last comment here, is it really the contractor's role to fundamentally challenge the RFP's validity? If you don't like it, you don't have to bid. Walk away. Now, it might be tougher, actually a lot tougher, if you're the incumbent. Obviously, you don't want to do that. But if you're not the incumbent, maybe you just skip out and say, I'm going to pass until you get this right. That's always the contractor's opportunity, is to simply skip out. And certainly for them to do minor revisions to their corporate experience submittals when it obviously was more O&M centric versus development centric, you can't unsee that. Those first opinions, or first impressions rather, they really do matter. That's going to happen. And the staffing relying mostly on just incumbent capture, not the most creative way of doing staffing. Not to say that you wouldn't want to do significant amounts of incumbent capture, but if you're relying on that, and this is just Brian's guess that perhaps Leidos might have taken their people and gone home, especially if they're remote, they don't have to be there. They can put them on some other job. It's not like Leidos has a shortage of software development business. Not at all. So just things are things to bear in mind that I think you can't unsee things. And ultimately, the more factors here that we really think about it, the big takeaway is you look at the ManTech bid, is that there was from a government perspective, I'm sure, a lot of concern about risk and a significant amount of risk, a lack of credibility of the core development methodology, Safe Agile, that they wanted to use to drive everything. If they didn't believe you know how to use that methodology, then you're dead. Game over. Do not pass go. So that's a critical failure right there. So a lot of lessons learned here that, and always the case here with these different blogs that we do on deadly sins, is never to shame anybody. I think we've all had good days. We've all had bad days. Sometimes we've had horrible days. But we all have off days. It is what it is. You learn from those mistakes, and we do these blogs in part to help you learn from what others have done, because others have paid the tuition bill that perhaps you don't have to pay. So learn from this. I hope it's been interesting and educational, maybe slightly entertaining as they can be. And we'll be talking again real soon with a whole lineup of more of these Deadly Sins blogs coming to you soon. Thanks a lot, and we will be in touch.